Richard Henry, Protector of the Kakapo by Lindy Kelly. The rain-lashed shores of Dusky Sound. Hardly a welcoming place to call home, but that's where a man named Richard Henry built his hut over 100 years ago. What's more, he lived there alone, with his dog, some paradise ducks, a weka and some peck seagulls as his only companion. Richard Henry wasn't frightened of solitude. In fact, he was happiest when living close to the wild birds he loved, learning about their habits and doing his best to protect them. Many people believed that if it weren't for his amazing dedication, at least 5 of New Zealand's flightless birds would now be extinct. Richard Henry was born in Ireland. He immigrated to Australia when he was a boy and grew up in the outback with the Aboriginal people, who taught him to be an expert bushman. Henry was fascinated by wildlife, and he especially loved studying creatures in their natural habitats. His ability to write about things he saw provided valuable information that is still used by conservationists today. When he was 29, Richard Henry moved to New Zealand. He spent a few years exploring the country, taking whatever work he could find, before finally settling in the back blocks of central Otago. Here, in between working as a sawmiller, rabbiteer and guide, Henry could do what he loved: boating, taxidermy, exploring and of course bird watching. Whenever he had the chance, Henry would take his much-loved dog and head for the rugged, bush-clad mountains. For weeks at a time he would study the many species of flightless birds he came across, examining the contents of their stomach to figure out their diets, and filling his notebook with observations. In 1883, Henry settled in the southern shores of Lake Tianau. Back then the forests were filled with native birds, including tieki, saddleback, kakapo, little spotted kiwi, and brown kiwi. But for Henry, best of all were the countless kakapo. On moonlit nights, said Charlie Douglas, one of New Zealand's early explorers, you could shake a tree and the kakapo would fall down like apples. Douglas also complained that there were so many loudly screeching kakapo it was impossible to sleep when he was camping out. But things were about to change for these gentle birds that were so fearless that they would climb onto people's shoulders to groom their hair. Even in the wild, kakapo were easy prey for both Māori and Pākehā, who enjoyed hunting the birds for their cooking pots. Early settlers also liked to keep the birds as pets, saying they were better company and more intelligent than cats or dogs. Kakapo were popular both dead and alive, and large numbers were trapped and stuffed and then sold to museums by professional bird collectors. Worse was to come. By the end of the 19th century, rabbits had become a serious problem for farmers. They begged the government to import ferrets, stoats and weasels, all part of a group called the mustelids, to hunt and kill the birds. Many scientists argued against this, knowing that these predators would also be a threat to native bird populations. But the farmers won, and thousands of mustelids were brought to New Zealand and released. The ferrets, stoats and weasels spread rapidly throughout the country. Richard Henry became very concerned about his beloved kakapo. The kakapo are the easiest thing in the world to exterminate, he wrote, and he was right. By 1890, there were no kakapo to be found in the North Island and very few in the South Island. Henry realised that the only way to protect the birds' extinction was to have them shifted to a remote island. He hoped that in 50 years' time, people would realise the kakapo's value and there would be no fear of them becoming extinct. Henry set about educating the public about the plight of the kakapo. He wrote a natural history column to the local newspaper, as well as articles about the deadly impact of introduced species on native wildlife. Henry also photographed the birds, taking the first known photo of a kakapo chick. At last people started listening to what Henry had to say. The government decided to make Resolute Island in Dusky Sound a wildlife sanctuary. Henry was asked to catch the endangered birds and watch over them, and he moved to the sound and built a modest hut within rowing distance of the island. It was a lonely place with heavy rains and frequent storms. Sometimes it would get so cold that the fjord would freeze over. But rain or shine, Henry worked on. With his dogs and muzzles, he would hunt for kakapo, kiwi and other flightless species in the nearby bush. Despite the often miserable conditions, Henry still managed to rescue hundreds of birds, rowing them safely in his boat. Then, in 1900, disaster struck. A stoat was seen on Resolution Island. Richard Henry was very distressed, but determined to wipe out these predators, a task that took him 6 long years. For most of the kakapo, however, it was too late. The fiordland population plummeted, devastated by the mustelids as well as dogs and hunters, until only a few birds remained. Henry's life work was all but destroyed. At the age of 63, unwell and disheartened, Henry left Dusky Sound forever. He had spent 14 years working to save the kakapo, and all for nothing. So he thought. Henry took a job as a ranger on Kapiti Island for a few years, then retired to Northland. Although surrounded by people, he continued to live as a hermit. Henry died in 1929, aged 84, with only the local postmaster at his funeral. But Henry's work wasn't for nothing. Although the species hovered on the brink of extinction for many years, fellow conservationists like Don Merton took up where Henry left off, and in 1975 Merton captured what he believed was the last fiordland kakapo. He named him Richard Henry, and for the last 3 decades the bird has been a crucial part of the national breeding program. Now, well over 50 years old, Merton guesses he could be as old as 100. This grand old bird has helped to save the kakapo from extinction, just like the first Richard Henry.